we do have some audience questions. I'm just waiting to hear from the production team about who we're bringing up first. It's really exciting. Let's get them up on the stage, just like we did with Joel before. It's James Langley. So let's welcome James up to the stage. James, hello. Great to see you. Glad that you could join us. I know you've got a question for our lovely panellists in Stockholm, so go ahead.
That's right. Hi, I'm James Langley from Talis. My question for Kenneth, what role should data encryption and key management take when moving workloads securely to cloud?
Hi, James. I think encryption is a key enabler in moving data to the cloud. I don't think that any information should be moved to any cloud, and regardless of jurisdiction, without having some kind of encryption in place. Obviously, depending a little bit on how sensitive the information it is that you are protecting. Of course, you might have to look into, let's say, the more advanced aspects of how you handle both encryption keys and what kind of extra protection mechanism that you might have to put in place.
James,
thank you.
James, can I ask you something? Is that okay? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Perfect.
I'm interested in this. So is your challenge, ideally would you want to encrypt, put it in the cloud, take it out of the cloud and decrypt it? Or are you trying to encrypt it, put it in the cloud and be able to decrypt it while it's there? Sorry, I know that's quite a stupid question, but I'm interested in your answer.
Yeah, no, it depends. I think it depends on the type of data, because obviously encrypted data cannot be used when it's encrypted. So it's good for storing stuff, basically when you really encrypt data. But there are a lot of native encryption services in Amazon, Azure, etc. PaaS services that use encryption, and that the data can actually be used. But it's protected in an encrypted way, in a native way. Mm-hmm. So it depends on the type of database.
Yeah, really interesting. Which again comes back to this issue, doesn't it, Stefan, of companies knowing what data they've got, where it is, what needs encrypting. How often does that challenge come up for you?
Sorry, how often the challenge comes up?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, I think it's coming up a lot more frequently now. We see an increased traction in the challenges of data sovereignty. So I think more and more people, specifically in public sector, are concerned about how the data is being stored and how it's being encrypted, and in front of all, who owns the encryption keys? Where do you have those?
Yeah.
So I think it's becoming actually, we've seen more and more customers asking for this.
Yeah. By the way, James, thank you for your question. Stefan, staying with you then. To what extent do customers and clients of yours have to sort of solve those questions themselves? And to what extent does Orange Cyber Defence get involved in those issues of, their data, the sovereignty, encryption, and so on?
I think it's, anyone from the initial kind of advisory assessment type of services, helping customers to understand the regulations, to understand what requirements that is being put on them. I think that's the entry level point. Then it's around the consultancy. And in that consultancy, helping to deploy specific mitigations options, and then on top of that, maybe also manage services if the customers lack the capabilities of running those kind of operations or threat detection capabilities required.
Yeah, interesting. Kenneth, can I come back to you just quickly? Something else occurred to me in terms of there are organisations I've spoken to who have made the point and said, I don't want to do it. I want my data on premises in my own data centre. That's it. Is that commonplace? And do you think those companies will just eventually have to do this?
I do believe, or what we can see is that, of course, that a lot of the innovation regarding new technologies is happening with one or another way inside in the cloud. But what I do believe is that the cloud service providers will find ways of dealing with the data sovereignty topics that we have talked about, perhaps by building legal entities that operate under European laws to avoid this kind of situations. So I do believe that this is a problem, of course, right here and right now, but I do believe that it will be sorted in a short to mid-term perspective.
Yeah. And that's interesting. That comes back to one of the points we made right at the beginning, which is sometimes it's not the technology that solves this, it's government or governance, so setting up another company might be part of it, which isn't a technology solution, it's a company-wide solution. Stefan, can I ask you something as well about this idea of DevSecops? I find that really interesting because sec is the middle bit, and I wonder, from what you've said, it sounds like that's right, because it sounds like the security, is being squeezed in the middle by development and operations. Have I got that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a term that was invented by, I think it was Gartner, but it's really to make sure security is part of the complete process. And to some aspect, I think customers are doing a good job on that. We can see them implementing in the CI/CD pipeline, making sure that you're scanning for vulnerabilities, scanning for risks with open source libraries early on in the pipeline of doing that before you deploy stuff. So in some assets, and that's already in place. But it's also around managing the identities. How do you, for example, we see a challenge with some customers maybe not apply the same level of logging to some admin accounts for the cloud. So when we do incident response, there's becomes challenge to see what actually has been done in those specific cloud environments. So it's really about applying the mindset of security across that DevOps development.
Stefan, can I stay with you on that then? The identity issue is an interesting one, and I was surprised that it didn't get a higher result in our poll. Is moving to cloud an opportunity to sort that out? If your identity structure isn't good, can organizations take that opportunity to say, right, we are now going to sort out our identities and who's got access to what?
Yeah, I think there are two different types of that. One is the identity and the access within the cloud, and the other one is the access to the cloud. And I think what we've seen now in the market is there's a growing demand now for what you call secure access services, edge type of services, where we have a control point for the access, both to your own cloud environments, but maybe also to other assets on the internet. And that's kind of one way of driving identity and access control with kind of a zero trust concept. But then obviously also have the access control within the cloud environments. So I think that, yes, we have a lot of opportunities when moving to cloud to do things a little bit smarter and better. But obviously, most customers have big legacy systems that you need to take into consideration when doing that.
Interesting stuff.
And one final question from me for you both before we wrap up the session. And this is really, you've talked about some great stuff, DevSecOps, you've talked about obviously cloud-based, you've talked about shift left, which I think is going to become a huge talking point in 2022. I'd like for our audience, for you to both maybe give a couple of key takeaways that you want them to take away from your session today, the key learnings that they'll go back and they'll think about and maybe even they'll action tomorrow. Stefan, you're nodding, so we'll come to you first. What key takeaways for our audience?
Yeah, well, if I have to give kind of 3 key takeaways, I would say the first takeaway is control your assets in the cloud. And controlling your assets, making sure you have visibility on what assets you have in your cloud or multi-cloud environments, making sure you can control that they are configured in accordance to best practices, and that you understand the attack surface and the vulnerabilities. I think that's key, because that's what we see is the main risk of cloud deployment. So controlling your assets is one. The second one is controlling access to those assets. We talked a bit about the zero trust concept, but I think you have a good opportunity now to deploy security in a good way to access those assets that we put in cloud. And the third one is don't forget about the detection and response capabilities when moving to cloud. You need to have the ability in the cloud, as well as you already have on premise, to do detection on threats, but also having the response capabilities and the policy and procedures in place, making sure you know how to exfiltrate data from your public cloud providers when specific breaches happen. Because as always, the time between detection and response will also have an impact on the size of the breach.